Back when Marvel Spider-Man was revealed in 2016, I remember being relieved that I had a PlayStation because I realised I'd been subconsciously waiting for this game since Web of Shadows. And then it came out and you could say I put a bit of time into it. But then we got the trailer for the sequel and I found myself comfortably aboard the hype train. But that's when I got to thinking, where could the sequel go? Now, don't get me wrong, I love the original, but with each time I played through it, I started noticing areas that could be improved. And so here I am with our list of how Marvel's Spider-Man 2 can be even greater than the first. Let's start with my favourite part of the original, the Traversal. I genuinely believe that the swinging was the best we've gotten in a Spider-Man game, including Spider-Man 2. Now, before you come at me, the point I want to make here is that the sequel needs to be a mix of Insomniac's Spider-Man and the OG Spider-Man 2. I keep a low skill floor so anyone can have fun, but raise the skill ceiling to allow for more creative expression when you're moving about. I honestly felt like I'd reached the possibility of what was possible with the traversal mechanics on the first playthrough. Not enough to stop me from playing through it 4 more times, mind you, but enough to leave me wanting more from the mechanics. For now, I have to settle with using a corner swing glitch to get more depth into it. Miles Morales has set the series on the right path with its trick system and Venom abilities, but there's room for more. That game also had the unfortunate side effect of making the swap back to Pete's traversal very noticeable. It's clear that when the sequel does come out, Peter's Spider-Man will need some new abilities to keep up with Miles. And I'm sure that Insomniac have already got great things planned for that, but what would be better than introducing gliding and making that his unique mechanic? Imagine, you reach the top of your swing, let go, and shift straight into Just Cause style gliding. Immediately, the skill ceiling raises with new possibilities. There's countless other additions we can talk about for this, but the ones that spring to mind are catapult move, sliding down walls like in Web of Shadows, and the ability to choose when to cut off your web, allowing for moves like wrapping around a crane or a flagpole. I think we can all agree that these would be welcome additions. Anything that brings me closer to recreating the opening montage from Amazing Spider-Man 2 is welcome in my book. However, as good as the traversal was in the original, there was one mechanic that stood out like a sore thumb, and boy, it was just not good to use. And that was the wall crawling. Going from swinging fluidly across the city, running across walls, flipping over rails, point launching, to then Spider-Man struggling to make it over a ledge, was a bit jarring. What's strange is that this also carried over into Miles Morales. So here I am hoping that ledges won't be Spider-Man's greatest nemesis in the sequel. Another mechanic that personally took me out of the immersion was the lack of fall damage. Now, I know this is a controversial topic, but for me, having fall damage is what brings the exhilaration of swinging out the dive in the last second. There was a real consequence for mistiming it. I get why Insomniac made the decision to take it out, to make the game more accessible, but this can be easily solved by making it optional or exclusive to high difficulty levels. All I'm saying is that diving from the top of the Empire State Building and landing with your shins intact did feel a little weird.
Hello, please help me.
Honestly, I could talk about possible traversal mechanics for the length of this video, but I've got other points to cover off, so instead, here's a list of some more that come to mind, and let us know in the comments if there's anything that I missed. Having stealth as an option in any game is a plus for me. Just the choice to be able to go in silently is a bonus, and I'm also one of those outliers who actually enjoys full stealth, as long as the mechanics are solid and it doesn't happen too often. That's why when I saw the Fist construction demo at E3 I was excited. I can swing about and fight but also sneak around? Great, I'm in. And to some extent the game did fulfill that promise, but it desperately needs to be expanded on. I promised myself I wouldn't compare the game to Arkham, but here I am about to compare the stealth mechanics to Arkham.
Get ready for the next battle.
Now, I get that it's not completely fair to compare them, as the Arkham series is clearly more centered around stealth, but I feel like Spider-Man got so close to being great in stealth that I can't help it. Let's take a look at the stealth arenas in both games. Arkham would put you in an almost sandbox experience with multiple different ways to approach a situation. Even from an environmental perspective, wall vents, weak walls, contextual takedowns, double takedowns, and then on top of that all the gadgets. You could play through a stealth area 100 times and it would be different each run through. Spider-Man on the other hand feels like it gets halfway there on each of those elements but never quite nails it. Environmental takedowns? Here's the same scaffolding you can pull down in every location. Gadgets? Only 2 are really any good in stealth, and the stealth areas were just too one note. It always boiled down to a really open area, walking, crawling around until someone is far enough so no one can see them, or shooting a web to get them away and then taking them out. Spider-Man even did have vents with specific takedown animations, but these were always in scripted sequences and couldn't be re-entered after you left them. Miles Morales did make improvements on this, with the Fisk Tower stealth section genuinely being one of my favourite parts from both games. A huge area that allowed you to kind of approach it the way you wanted. Go in, take some guys out, swing out, go invisible, any way that you wanted to go. It was the closest to that sandbox experience I mentioned, and I'm always happy to get to that mission. What I mostly want is just a bit of variety when it comes to the environment. Give us an arena with wide open areas but also tight corridors, an area with vents and various takedown opportunities, just to make it feel a bit more improvisational when you get in. And then we get onto the MJ and Miles sections, which I really didn't mind initially. I think they did what they set out to do, which, to me at least, was break up the game a bit and remind the player that normal people do exist in this world. Like, to me, Rhino's never been a particularly frightening villain with his comically exaggerated accent and legit horn on his head. But that one Miles mission made me realise that to Spidey, these guys are a normal occurrence, but to a person, they would be terrifying. Even the time you play as Miles where you have to lift debris and the QT makes you mash the buttons so much longer than you ever had to do with Spider-Man. I thought it was clever. It really made me feel like an average human. It just felt like there were too many of these missions. I get that they want to slow down the pace occasionally, but these ground it to a halt. And with 8 missions spread evenly throughout the game, it just stopped the fun of being Spider-Man far too often. And it made me realise how simple these were compared to the rest of the game. You only get a weapon and with it some depth for MJ in her last mission, which means all 4 other times your goal is to literally walk around as slow as possible through a maze from point A to point B. There were moments that I thought were great here. The Grand Central mission was a highlight, and the Miles supply run mission I talked about earlier is burned into my memory. The way I see them improving this is just to reduce the number of these missions or give MJ proper stealth game mechanics. This way there would be a nice pleasant change of pace and gameplay style. But whatever you do, Insomniac, please let me skip them in New Game Plus.
Demons! Looks like they bring in their buddies in shipping containers.
Generally, I think the combat did exactly what it set out to. Spidey feels fast, nimble and agile. And enemy variety was actually decent, with each faction being introduced throughout the game's story. What I think was a missed opportunity was mixing the great traversal with the combat. It's a bit sad that we can't swing into a group of enemies and kick them straight from our swing. Granted, there is a swing kick when you hold attack in the air, but this doesn't have the same punch as the momentum-based swing kick from Web of Shadows. Just a quick side note here, I've mentioned Web of Shadows a couple of times, and it is great, but Insomniac Spider-Man is in my opinion a far better overall package. But that doesn't mean that there aren't some notes that Insomniac can take from it. Also, aerial combat is just straight up OP. Once you lift someone into the air, you can just wail on them, free from any threat, until later in the game, when there's 2 enemy types that provide a very mild threat. Let's touch back on the Fisk construction mission again. There's a reason this was the first gameplay they showed, because it was a high point of mixing in combat and traversal. There's a few groups of enemies on different levels of the building, and it felt great to have the freedom to go from one to the other, swinging in between, again bringing that sandbox experience into the mix. Generally speaking, suit powers could use a bit of an overhaul. I use maybe 4 suit powers at a time. The Equalizer, Web Blossom for just at the start of the game, and the resupply. Oh, and also quips. You've got to have the quips. But weirdly, you can actually use the quips to parry enemies just before they hit you. Next time you jump into the game, give it a go. It's actually a lot of fun. when you look at the other suit powers, there's just no need to use them. Why would I use quad damage when I can use equalizer, throw out a couple of drones and clear any fight in seconds? Or web blossom and then use concussive blast to stick everyone to a wall. Testing out the other suit powers when I first got them was fun, but I'd always default back to the ones that were the most efficient. I think the issue is that out of the 20 plus suit powers, only one is not combat focused. And this is where there's an interesting opportunity for Insomniac. Make some of the powers focus on other areas like Traversal. Low gravity, for example, seems pretty useless when you get it because the game tells you to use it in combat. But its true use is when you're swinging about, pick up some speed and switch it on, letting you essentially fly through Manhattan.
Up in the sky, it's a bird!
It's a plane!
It's Superman! Yes, it's Superman!
Where the combat does stumble a little bit is in the boss fights, which overall could be a bit more unique. They're all really made up of waiting for an attack, counter it, webbing them up and punching them. Rinse and repeat. The initial Scorpion fight when Pete is tripping is great, it was unique, and I think with Spider-Man having the best rogue gallery in comics, tied with old Brucey of course, there's so much potential there, but I'm not going to talk too much about the bosses. It's a point that's been repeated to death and covered better by others like White Light. What I will dwell on for a second are the QTEs. Look, I don't have a problem with QTEs usually, they can be great and also hilarious, but there's so many of them. It feels like almost every major moment in the game is resolved with a QTE. Yes, you can turn them off and get a cutscene, but that still leaves us with parts of the game that would have been amazing as gameplay. Like, take the crane sequence for example. Imagine how great it would have been if we had control at that point in the game and were able to run up the crane. Not complete freedom, but even the illusion of it would be better. Uncharted does a great job with this, where sections that are essentially QTEs are disguised as gameplay for set pieces, and it makes all the difference. Insomniac's recreation of Manhattan was really something special. You could tell the team put everything the hardware allowed them to put in. The fact that they went out of their way to create specific animations for fire escape traversal just to be able to include them goes to show the level of passion that was poured into their New York. So for this section, I'm not really going to cover improvements, but more what Insomniac could add to make it even greater than the first game. Like, expanding to Queens and Brooklyn seems like a no-brainer. Not only does it make the map bigger, but the difference in architecture would make traversing a different experience than Manhattan. Plus, and this is a big one for me, bridges. I have no idea why it appeals to me so much, but swinging across bridges is one of my biggest wishes for the sequel. My memories from doing this in Ultimate Spider-Man have stayed with me vividly throughout the years. I want to also touch on the music, and something I'd love to see is having the option to pick your backing track for swinging. The theme song is great, but when you've sunk hours into the game, it does start to get a little repetitive. Now, I'm not a music rights expert, but from what I know, Sony own the rights to the theme tunes for both the Tobey and Andrew movies, so it would be amazing to see them in there as an option. Even now, I'll sometimes turn down the in-game music and stick on the Danny Elfman theme tune on Spotify, just to swing about to. I mean, you know, nostalgia's a powerful thing. And that brings me to my last point in the world, the side missions. These were pretty hit or miss, which is a shame because of the amount of possibilities again stemming from the rogues, like where's the Big Wheel side mission arc? Jokes aside, the most memorable from the bunch for me was the Tombstone mission line, and there's enough B and C tier villains for Insomniac to create smaller stories with. Dynamic missions such as Crime were a great addition and give you something to do even when you've done everything. But what was missing was the friendly neighbourhood part in Friendly Neighbourhood Spider-Man. You've heard it before, but I'm going to say it again. Insomniac, please, give us the balloon missions and pizza delivery missions. Again, I'm hopeful this is on the way with Miles Morales including missions that were specifically designed for a less combat-focused experience. But there were only a limited number of these, and what I'm talking about is having them randomly pop up like crimes. It could be anything, from saving NPCs from a burning building, to finding cats, to getting the balloons. Giving us a more varied selection of randomly generated missions. Just before I wrap up, it might sound like I complained a lot in this video, but honestly, the original is one of my top games of all time. There's countless bits that I haven't brought up here, like the story for example, because to me it was perfect, giving what I believe is the definitive representation of Spider-Man. A guy who's a hero but struggles with juggling Spider-Man and Peter, often leading to a loss for both, and Insomniac nailed that. This is just my wish list, and even if one of them makes into the sequel, I'll be happy, but you know, mainly the gliding. Thanks for watching. If there's anything I missed, let us know in the comments down below, and if you like what you saw, drop the video a like and subscribe for more content. As a new channel, it really helps us out. If you want to go further into the YouTube hole, why not watch our video on Overwatch 2 and whether it can actually be called a sequel, or the 5 games that stood out to us from EGX. And we'll see you for the next video.